Before I begin, I want to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy Holidays for those who celebrate that kind of stuff. I hope you are having a good time with loved ones or finding some time to relax or treating yourself in some way, and just extremely grateful for an awesome year. Really owe you guys a lot. Now, unfortunately for Ubisoft, their time, the company's time, hasn't been so merry this past year and a half or so, as they keep losing trust when it comes to workers and employees who are sick and tired of Ubisoft's mishandling of its culture of harassment, misconduct, abuse, and discrimination. Many saying that the company hasn't gone far enough. They're losing a lot of trust from players in their community, especially recently with their attempt to shoehorn NFTs into their games in ways that clearly don't benefit us, the players, but rather it's just an additional form of monetization that they clearly intend to exploit. But specifically where workers are concerned, we are seeing something of a mass exodus, and that's not a term that the headlines made up here with this news outlet, Axios, reporting on this. The situation has gotten so bad that it's actually the developers, the workers within Ubisoft, who are calling the situation right now the Great Exodus and the Cut Hardery. This is a company that employs over 20,000 workers. Many of their colleagues describe a flow of goodbyes that they've never seen before. So attrition isn't necessarily uncommon in the gaming industry, but by Ubisoft standards and their usual norms, what's happening within the company right now, the amount of people and developers and workers who are leaving is at an unprecedented level. And we're not just talking about low to mid-level workers, we're talking about veterans who've been with the company for many, many years, top-level talent, as stated here by Axios. 5 of the top 25 credited people from the company's biggest 2021 game, Far Cry 6, are already gone. 12 of the top 50 from last year's biggest Ubisoft release, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, have left as well. And this is on top of also mid-level and low-level workers leaving. And this is especially happening in Ubisoft's Canadian studios. Ubisoft's got some studios based in Montreal and Toronto. And in each of those, at least 60 total workers have left in the last 6 months. That's at least 60 each. So at least 120 workers have left among the two studios, which is just not a good sign and above the normal levels at which Ubisoft developers leave and are replaced. And at this stage, this situation is starting to have a tangible impact on development pipelines for ongoing Ubisoft projects, which have been stalled or slowed as a result of these mass departures. Keep in mind that replacing workers isn't like replacing tools. Game companies treat developers and workers and employees like they're expendable tools, but every person has a certain amount of experience and knowledge and know-how and instinct and talent, you name it. And when you've got really experienced veteran top talent leaving and being replaced by more newcomer talent, you've got a situation where the workflow is going to be negatively impacted. And as more veterans are replaced, it's just going to clog the pipeline even more with less experienced people taking the helm and not being able to offer what these top talents brought to the table. And so we are seeing situations like one developer who noted to Axios how he was contacted by a colleague currently working at Ubisoft to solve a problem because nobody else knew how to do it. No one was still there who knew the system. So this colleague essentially contacted a veteran who knew about this stuff to help them out with a problem that the current talent just didn't know how to resolve. And this really highlights how disruptive it can be when too many developers and when too much talent starts leaving, especially top level talent who know the operations of the company, the operations of the technical aspects of developing a game and resolving issues, and just bring that experience to smooth out the development process of a game as much as possible. And when top-level talent isn't there to train newer employees to bring them up to speed and up to their level when the top-level talent eventually are, forced to leave or, want to pursue new avenues or want to retire, whatever it is. When that cycle of the master teaching the apprentice who then become the masters, that vicious cycle being disrupted by the level of departures and attrition that's taking place right now, yeah, of course, that's gonna just slow down and stall projects to a level that's not ideal. As for why developers are leaving, well, none of these reasons should come as much of a surprise. Between low pay, an abundance of competitive opportunities, frustration at the company's creative direction, and unease at Ubisoft's handling of a workplace misconduct scandal that flared in mid-2020, there are plenty of reasons why these workers have had enough of a leadership that's proven corrupt, complacent, and negligent. As one longtime veteran noted, this all makes Ubisoft an easy target for recruiters. Workers are just woefully displeased with management and how they don't seem to be showing a level of empathy for human beings that they should if they have any sense of morality. With them scraping by doing the bare minimum is how another now former Ubisoft worker put it, especially where Ubisoft's awful work culture is concerned. Recently, we have seen employees speak out, telling management that they've done nowhere close to enough, and it feels like they are just trying to bury the issue under the rug and move forward, look towards the future, but you gotta address the past first, when the shadow of that continues to loom over a company that has been suffering from this for a long time, and only now has the culture issues come to the surface and developers have been less afraid to speak out, especially as Activision Blizzard, all that stuff takes place with developers protesting, and as that fur spreads across developers who are just sick and tired of general BS from management across a wide range of companies. The past year and a half was the breaking point for a lot of the workers, and the past year and a half is how long Ubisoft has been dealing with the scandal surrounding its work culture, and clearly the level of mishandling of that is a big contributor to the great exodus. Now, the workplace harassment stuff tends to happen to women, people of color, and marginalized people, essentially. As for the rest, I mean, a lot of it has to do with low pay and just how much better the offer is from other companies. One programmer told Axios they were able to triple their take-home pay by leaving. Generous competing offers has been eating away at Ubisoft and made the company an easy target to poach its developers and workers, which is why Ubisoft recently offered across-the-board pay raises for workers, specifically at its Canadian studios. But there are other studios who are seeing this and wondering, well, where is our pay raise? Frustrated developers and other studios are wondering when they're getting raises too. But in equal measure, a lot of workers are just disillusioned by how leadership is focused more on moving on and looking forward while ignoring the complaints, concerns, and cries of their employees. One specific employee cited how they tried to involve themselves in the company's efforts to reform its culture, but were disappointed by what they heard from their bosses, and their entire article is dedicated to developers speaking out to news outlets about their disappointment in leadership's response. There's literally an article here from Kotaku published back in October 21st, 2021, whose headline reads, "Despite filing harassment reports, employees say Ubisoft isn't doing much. A former developer at the studio behind Assassin's Creed complained about harassment and never saw it addressed." This is after CEO Yves Guillemot and Ubisoft's executives promised to be more proactive about this kind of stuff, to learn from their mistakes and you name it, but not much has really changed. The general sentiment out there is that this generally feels like the same company that's always been, except they're being a little more outspoken to essentially try to paint a certain image that Ubisoft is being proactive, but the new policies that they're implementing, the actions that they're taking, are very much the bare minimum and nowhere near as impactful as they should be. And we're a year and a half into the scandal, and the fact that they seem to have done even less in Activision Blizzard, whose leadership hasn't really done that much, and what actions they have taken, they only did because their hand were forced by protesting employees, really goes to show where Ubisoft leadership's priorities lie, which is to protect the corporation and its leadership and the image of the company, rather than work towards improving the lives of the human beings that they're responsible for as employers. So workers just don't want to be associated with this company anymore. They find the company's reputation being too much, the notoriety that they've built, especially this past year and a half. It's legitimately embarrassing, said this worker. They just don't want to be a part of a company that has this kind of reputation, this kind of image attached to them, and understandably so. And of course, there are other workers who, unfortunately, their livelihood is too attached to Ubisoft, the company, which is something that Ubisoft leadership and executives know most workers just rely too much on this job, and it's not easy to just go out there and jump ship and find a new job. It's a huge risk to do that, and that is the power that these executives hold over these workers. But you push workers too far, and they'll eventually really risk it all. And we saw that with Activision Blizzard and how many developers did strike and walk out and protest. If Ubisoft continues down this course, there may very well come a tipping point. And when that happens, Ubisoft may have their hands forced by far more forceful protests and strikes. And I hope we get to that point, because it's very clear Ubisoft leadership will need to have their arms twisted before they will take action that feels tangible and impactful. Now, Axios also spoke to a Ubisoft executive who argues that, things are not as bad as it's being reported. The company's standing is comparable to its peers, or I should specify Ubisoft's head of people ops, Anika Grant, who said that our attrition today is a few percentage points above where it typically is, but it's still within industry norms. That damage control attitude of it's really not that bad. Things are relatively normal despite the abnormal amount of departures that we're seeing and the abnormal amount of protests and employees signing petitions and letters and general protests that we're seeing within our company and all of the media backlash and employees speaking out. Everything's good, guys. Don't worry about it, is basically the attitude that leadership is taking. And you wonder why workers are getting sick and tired and deciding enough is enough. They noted how despite the many departures, they've managed to hire 2,600 workers since April. But for a company to run efficiently in the long term, you need to nourish talent for the long term. So all of their experience at the company leads them to getting better at their job. And then those people are able to lead new workers who can get to that point as well, and then talent can grow together. It's all about that saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. But with so much veteran talent leaving and being replaced by waves of new workers, this is becoming more quantity over quality of talent. And that's just not a method that has worked out for other companies that have been through something similar, like CD Projekt Red, which is losing a lot of top-level talent. It's lost a lot of top-level talent even before Cyberpunk released because of just how mismanaged the company was, which is something that I reported on, and multiple employees and sources reached out to me, and I reported on that years ago. And a big part of that studio's issue and why the workflow was so constantly disrupted was because of its high rate of developers leaving and being replaced by newer talent. And this just feels like exactly what's happening to Ubisoft right now. You can tout all of the numbers about how many workers you've hired, but how much talent is being nourished is the question. And it would seem as though a lot of talent that has been nourishing are deciding that they don't want to be nourished by Ubisoft specifically, and are taking jobs that treat them better and pay them better. Yeah, Ubisoft's attrition rate is a little higher than the norm, actually. It's at 12%. Not as bad as Activision Blizzard's 16%, but being a little better than Activision Blizzard isn't a tall bar to meet, whereas companies like EA and Take-Two and Epic Games are at 9%, 8%, and 7% respectively, significantly lower than Ubisoft. Now, it wasn't just in this more recent article that Ubisoft's chief of people, Anika Grant, tried to do some damage control. Axios released another article back on December 6th titled "Ubisoft Admits Its Handling of Misconduct Lost Some Workers' Trust." And she does say we made mistakes in how we handled certain aspects of this crisis, but actions speak louder than words, and actions don't reflect the sentiments that she expresses here. Not to mention that even in this article, she insists that the key goal should be to move forward instead of addressing the past and handling all that. When asked about if Ubisoft would go back to correct the handling of some earlier complaints, she said, "I think our focus really is moving forward. Forget the trauma from the past. That's old news. Who cares about that? Just not giving two shits about the fact that people continue to live with the trauma of having worked at Ubisoft, just basically saying those people don't matter. It's all about moving forward for the company's sake, essentially." And despite workers having expressed in an open letter released earlier this year that it still feels like Ubisoft is moving known offenders from studio to studio, team to team, with no repercussions, giving them a golden parachute, essentially, Grant insisted, "We don't do that at all. But that's not representative of what employees are saying en masse. Again, I bring up this article. Despite filing harassment reports, employees are saying that Ubisoft isn't doing much about those harassment reports, about the abusers. A lot of them tend to be people in positions of power who are still in positions of power. Sure, Ubisoft did let go of a few key entities here and there, but not all of them. And if they can do a 100% sweep of abusers within the company, then it doesn't really say that much. Just getting rid of a few bad actors, but not getting rid of all of them, that is not reflecting positively on a leadership that's already proven woefully negligent. Axios also pointed out several public accounts assert workplace abuse continues at the studio. And when specifically asked about that Kotaku article noting how employees still feel like harassment reports aren't being fully addressed, workers have also said some of the company's actions have had a silencing effect. Grant said, Ubisoft doesn't have any policy that prevents team members from sharing their workplace experiences publicly. But when the issues that are being expressed publicly aren't actually addressed by the company, and they continue to insist that it's all about moving forward, that is in itself a form of silencing employees. It's a form of brushing past them and ignoring them. Employees' voices don't really matter unless the company and the employers show that they're willing to listen and take action based on that feedback. Otherwise, their voices are falling, the employees' voices are falling on deaf ears. It's as good as being silenced. Now, the worst part is that Grant can't even really fully commit to the lack of a policy preventing team members from speaking out. She said that she does ask people involved in investigations to keep them confidential, to protect the integrity of the process and the rights of all those involved. Integrity of the process. You've got to be freaking kidding me. What integrity? What process? Even when HR and people in positions of power ignore victims, defend abusers, or actively are abusers themselves, there is no leeway, there is no process for victims to seek justice. And you've got to love the choice of word here. The company asks people, no. Companies threaten employees. They threaten their livelihoods, knowing the power that they hold. Now, earlier in this article, it is noted how Grant does admit that, what I think we missed is the employee experience too, that I don't think we always communicated enough back to people who had raised an issue in the first place about what we found as part of the investigations, the decisions that we made, and the actions that we took. And I think, unfortunately, people lost trust in that process. That's something right now we are 100% focused on fixing. But in the same interview, she has the audacity to say that I think our focus really is moving forward instead of let's address the past. So it just feels like there's a complete lack of sincerity to her admitting Ubisoft's mistakes. It just feels like she's placating and saying what people want to hear instead of actually meaning what she says. So yeah, with this kind of attitude from leadership, it's no wonder that there is a great exodus taking place within Ubisoft. And if this continues, it will lead to the disruption of game development projects. It will lead to the disruption of essentially Ubisoft's ability to make revenue, to turn a profit, as they need to ship new games to do that to that end. And the hope is that as more and more employees grow sick and tired of it, as more employees leave or protest or strike, hopefully down the line, just something disruptive needs to happen. And hopefully once that happens, Ubisoft will realize that the lifeblood of their company is the workers. And if you push them far enough, they will rebel enough that it's going to have a drastically negative impact on the company's long-term financial prospects. But unfortunately, I feel like so far the measures that Ubisoft employees have taken have not been disruptive enough. Nowhere near the level that Activision Blizzard employees have been protesting, striking, walking out, and demanding. But with Ubisoft's inaction, with their continued priority of burying issues under the rug, and with things like them pushing for NFTs when even developers don't want them in their games, when developers are afraid of how mandating NFTs and basing game design around pushing NFTs alongside the microtransactions and loot boxes, how that will negatively affect the creative autonomy they have to make games as fun as possible. Like, combine all of these issues that kind of keep piling up, and with employees now leaving and that creating headlines, and just the company becoming more and more of an embarrassing place to work in, there might come a point where a limit will soon be reached. And, I hope that Ubisoft employees really push for change. Change can only happen from within. and media outlets can only do so much by reporting. It is ultimately employees who are the lifeblood of a company that can disrupt the internal organs, if you will, of this corrupt machine. And so I hope that happens sooner rather than later, or that Ubisoft gets their shit together. But I have zero trust that Ubisoft leadership will change their current stance of let's just move forward, let's pretend the past never happened. And so unless disruption happens, Ubisoft will just continue being the same old Ubisoft. But yeah, there is a reckoning happening within the games industry currently, and I don't suspect it is an issue that will go away anytime soon. But I suppose only time will tell how all of this will play out. In the meantime, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on the mass exodus of workers, employees, and developers, particularly top-level ones, that Ubisoft is currently seeing, and what you think the future holds for a company that is just descending further and further when it comes to both community sentiment and workers, employees, and developer sentiments towards this company that has gone with way too much for far too long. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.